the next ribbon group we are going to talk about is filter, right? Now, under these filters, we have slicer, and then we have timeline. Okay. So before you slice your data set, it is always good to change this or change the data set to a table, right? So you must always do that. How do we do that? Remember how we change a data set to a table in previous lessons? We can just come here and click here and then change our data set to a table. Okay, so this has become a table. Let's go back to insert menu and click on slicer. You can see that all the fields in this data set are here. ID, name, and so on and so forth, right? So if I want to see all these slicers, what I need to do is just to click and check each of them, right? Now, what are slicers? Slicers are filters, just as this title implies. So they are filters. If I check all these ones, and click my OK, you will see these guys coming up here. These are the slicers. That's for ID, for name. Okay. Let me just arrange it here. So that we can see what they do. All right, so if I click here on this number, you see what happens to the table? It filters and brings in only the data that we have for this very ID number. See it? So if I select down up to this point, you can see that it brings in the data up to this point. If I click only the one that is here, you will see it. So you can use this to actually filter your data, maybe by name or by month and so on. So for example, you can see that if I click this, right, what we have there is that I have my ID number. This is for product 1, 2020, 2824. You can see all this. So if I just come there, how you can manipulate and click all this in, all of them are now gone because there is no data for this very ID number on product 10 on 2024, January 2024, February, right? 2824, sorry. So there is no data at all for that. Just understand that we use these slicers to filter our data, right? We use it to filter our data. If you have a very large data set, right, you can use this filter. For example, there is what we did the other day, using the names of countries. For example, if you are getting supply or maybe sales from different countries, right, different regions in a particular country, just like that for more than one countries, right? So if you want to filter only that country, these slicers can help you to do that. Okay, slicers can help you to do that. So this is how the slicers come out. Now, if you want to filter by month, assuming you had maybe slicers by different periods of the year and so on. We'll do that, right? We'll use timer also, or the timeline, to also check for that. And let's check timeline here. Okay, so timeline here, anytime you want to do anything about timeline, your data set must have a date. If you look at this backline data set, there is nothing like dates here. We only have the months and then the data that came in, or the sales that came in those months. But for you to be able to use this timeline, there must be a date, or there must be dates in your data set, or else it will not work. It will ask you to provide those dates, but there are no dates in your data set. So how do you do that? Come to your timeline. Like now I have my dates here, right? This is just for 2024. You can have different, different dates for different months and different years together here. Assuming it was maybe 2 or 3 years or 5 years products sales or whatever, you will have all those dates here. And this data set will be very long, right? So for me to create my timeline, we have to also change this one to a table. Do you understand? You have to change this one to a table. I talked about data modeling before. We'll do it when we get to data analytics, right? So for this to also work, you have to change this to a table, or maybe a pivot table, right? So I can do that and change it. So I can drag my date and bring it here, right? I just click the date entered here. Days and months are in my dates. And then let me drag my cells to my values. You can see that here. Right, let's use that. Let's go back to our timeline. This will create a timeline for this data, right? You can see now that it works, right? So when you check this box and click OK, a timeline will come out. Look at the timeline here. So what you are seeing here is what is known as timeline, right? So this timeline right now is showing from January to December, right? But in case you want to see just January, of course you can increase this if you want to. I can just come here and click January, and it filters this table immediately, right, to January, and gives you the total of January. If I do same, if I click February, it would take away the data for January and bring in data for February, all right, with its total. But if I want to check the sales or the data for January, maybe from January to May, I can now click and drag. It will show data for these 5 months and the total, the grand total. That's what it does here. Now, if you also look at the ribbon tab, you will see that you have a context ribbon tab right here for this timeline. So you can change the color. These are different styles that you have here. You can change it to anyone you want or you like to use, right? So assuming we had more timelines and you want to connect all of them, that is when we use report connections. I hope that is understood. You can also change the name here. So maybe something says timeline. You can see that the name here has changed where you had dates before. And if you want to see the timeline by years, that is, if you had different years, right? Those years will be placed just like this: 2024, 2025, 2026, 2023, just like that. But we only have 1 year. That's why you are seeing only 2024. If we want to filter by quarters, you can see Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Why these ones are not blue is because I did not highlight all of them. So I can just click and drag to highlight all. You see it? If I want to take Q1, I just click Q1. It gives me the first 3 months. So all these are being used by data analysts to analyze data, right? To get insights of exactly what is happening. So for example, you want to check the totals of each quarter, right? The first quarter of the year, how did this perform? How did that perform, right? You just take this first quarter. Check Q2. You see the total is different. The next 3 months, April, May, and June. This one, July, August, September. And of course, from October, November, and December, right? So that's what we have for this timeline, right? You can display it by months. You can also display it by days. So it changes today, and you can see you can scroll. You can scroll to the right. Use this to scroll and see what is happening in your data. So that's how timeline is being used. Remember, when you are working with this timeline, it works with pivot table. And when you are working with your table, right? When you are working with any data set, it is always advised that you turn or change that data set to a table if you must do more things. You must carry out maybe complex calculation or formulas in that data set. Not because if you don't change it, it won't work for other formulas. It will work. But when you change your data to a table in Microsoft Excel, it gives you more flexibility to do many things, right? So that's that. So that's how to bring in that timeline I talked about, or we talked about this guy here, timeline in filters ribbon group, right? Under insert menu. So just know what these ones are doing. When we will be working with data, right? When we'll be analyzing data, we'll use this to analyze our data, to check what is happening in the data. And then you get even more understanding about this timeline and other things we've talked about. For now, it's just for you to know that something like this exists. But the application will help you to know more about it depending on the type of insight you want to get from your data. It is not being used all the time anyways. So but it depends on what you want to use it for. Okay, so is there any question about this timeline that we were talking about?
Please, can you just go over what it actually does again?
Okay.
I really
Your timeline summarizes your data according to the time you choose. For example, we have this data set right here. This data set here. And I said that before you can use a timeline, your data set must have dates, right? And this is the colon for dates, or this field is for dates. And I told you that, and I said that these dates can be a range of dates, right? Maybe from a particular year, say it could be from 2010, could be from 2015. It depends on how large the data set is, right? And of course, you also have other fields and what happened in those dates. This example, we are using a kind of sales data. We are using sales data to check what happened on those dates. The sales that came in, on these dates that are here. And I said that when you are working with a data set, it is always a good practice to change it to a table because you have more flexibility when using a table than if it is an ordinary data like this, data set like this. Not because you cannot use some formulas here, you can. But when you are using a table, it makes it, there are some things that will be done. In fact, it's more powerful to use a table and analyze your data because you can do a lot of things, right? You will understand that more when we start analyzing data. So now what I did was to create a pivot table. I created a pivot table for this data, right? Which dropped into this sheet 1 as a summary of this data, this timeline here. Now, if you look at the dates, you will see that we have February. Like this is February, this is February, this is March, April, and so on. So what this pivot table did was to sum the cells for each of the months and gave us these titles that are, these totals that are here. And at the end, it gave us the grand total, right? These data, we did not have them. I brought them in through these pivot table fields, right? By bringing my date into the row fields, right? Let me do that again. Let me take off everything. This is how it looks like, right? So I brought in the date right here to this row field by just checking this box. I told you the other day that you can also drag it and drop it here. Drag them and drop here, right? Anyone you want to use for your rows, you can drag and drop here, right? And then in these values, I said, let's use cell. Let me drag cell and drop there. Sales amount, right? So that's what generated this. Okay. Now, the timeline, this timeline was brought in by this insert menu. Remember, the insert menu that we use, this timeline here. It was the one that brought in the pivot timeline when you are in pivot table, we were talking about this timeline. That's what took us to this pivot table again, right? So this is the same thing here. This is what brought in this timeline. When you are under your pivot table, right? So you see the timeline here, and I selected this. I selected this timeline, and it brought it in, just as it brought in this new one right now, right? So here in this timeline, I told you that this is represented in terms of year. You can check, you can use in terms of quarters, every quarter of the year. That's quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. You can use it or filter it in terms of month. It will take the 12 months. You can also filter it in terms of days, right? Now, why you still see all this data is because the whole of this timeline is selected. Let me return it back to month. So if I want to see only the summation of sales done in the month of January, I will just come and click my January here, and it will filter this data and gives me only January, the grand total of January. The same thing is applicable for any of the months here, right? If you check this data, it's changing, right? It's changing. So if I want to take like 3 months, I will just click and drag to give me 3 months and the total for 3 months. So that's the same thing as quarter, first quarter of the year. If I want it to give me for 6 months, I will drag this to June, and it will give me data for January to June. So all this, why are we doing this? We want to look at, maybe you are given a data set to look at the profitability for the first 6 months of the year, right? Maybe there are reports that are normally done every 6 months, right? You can use this to say, okay, from January to December, to June, from January to June, this is the total we had. That's first half of the year. From July to December, this is what we had, right? And so you can compare this data and see maybe which one was more profitable, which of the half of the year, of the halves of the year was more profitable than the other, and why. So this will give you information about your prediction for next year, what you can do within that time, that something, maybe an outlier, there was an outlier, right? Maybe a high profit margin for a particular month. And then you check what normally happens at that time, and then make decisions. Say, okay, for this, if you have, for example, if you have a lot of products, right? Right? Like in this December, food items, right, are always very expensive, and people sell and make more profit. So if you check a particular, maybe a particular product, say rice, okay, rice sells well in December. So next year, you will know how to stock your rice and wait for December sales. I don't know if you understand that. So this gives you information on what happened at which period, so that you can use it for predicting the future. Remember, in data analytics, apart from analyzing the data, you can predict. You can use, that is why it gives us the ability to make informed decision about what can happen or what may likely happen, right, in a particular or during a particular period of time. Is that understood? So this is used to also summarize your data. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
And I told you that you can change the colors, of course, to any color you want to use. Okay. So that's that about this timeline that is here. Timeline, slicer, all of them are tools that you use to summarize your data and peep into a particular range of data sets to know exactly what it is doing and make informed decision about that. I hope that is understood.
Yes, sir.